Here to discuss all of this is America's accountant, Dan Geltrude. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
So Dan, apparently it wasn't the best idea to be extremely lenient on handing out COVID cash, for some of these people, but not for others. And I suspect, everyone knows someone that kind of took advantage of the system. We know celebrities were able to file claims for millions of dollars, while the people who actually really needed help didn't receive it. Do you think that there was something, what was going on here? What was the meaning behind all of this? What's your take on the whole thing?
Well, anytime you're talking about fraud, it always comes down to a single issue. And that issue is lack of controls. That's how these things happen. So whether or not these programs like the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, was a good program or not, it still was subject to a lot of abuse. And why is that? It's because the controls over the program simply weren't there. And that opened the door for people to abuse it. For example, with PPP, what you had was people creating fake payroll in order to get this money in. Now, of course, when people are doing things like that and taking advantage of the system and the controls aren't there, we have to wait years to be able to catch up with them. But either way, it looks like some people are going to jail for this, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. These people must be held accountable. Do you think this was perhaps done by design, maybe to transfer wealth in another unsuspecting way, or do you think it was just lack of oversight?
I think it was lack of oversight. Listen, you have to keep in mind that when these programs were rolling out, it was with very short notice. They didn't have a lot of time to put this together. So given the circumstances of time constraints and truly trying to help people who were literally having their lives, their financial lives shut down from one day to the next, it did call for some extreme action, and that's what was being done. But unfortunately, related to that, you did have a lot of holes in the program that then created the door to open for fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was quite fascinating to watch. I know I saw people shopping on Rodeo Drive that you would never suspect to be there. So it was an interesting time. So hopefully it all gets sorted out now. I want to switch gears. I don't know if you saw Janet Yellen's insanely delusional take as to why the public opinion of the IRS is extremely negative. Let's check it out and then we'll come back.
Can you tell me if you have an opinion on what the IRS's reputation is amongst the country? Have you done any polling or anything like that to see what generally taxpayers think, middle, wealthy people, bottom? Are they kind of like the National Park Service? Are they a little different? What do you think their impression is?
Well, it's extremely negative because the IRS has been starved for resources. And so there are insufficient
I don't mean to cut you off, but I've got even less time than the ranking member does. So you think it's resource related that they have
Absolutely.
Have a bad reputation? It's nothing to do with historical culture in the agency or anything like that?
The agency has been resource starved.
That makes sense, right? Americans don't like the IRS because there's not enough agents? Is this woman delusional?
Well, I think she was slightly off the mark there. Look, we are mixing two different concepts here. First is what people's view of the IRS is, and I would say because they've done a great job marketing it, people fear the IRS.
Yeah.
And because the IRS has been feared for so long, well, that's the negative impression. Now, of course, like anything else, we've heard plenty of stories about abuses within the IRS. Now, we can't have a broad brush across the whole department, but certainly because of their immense power and because there's been abuses, there's a lot of negativity. But Janet Yellen is actually right about the IRS not having enough resources. Now, I'm not talking about loading up with more auditors. I'm talking about they don't have enough people to process tax returns and to answer questions. So we're mixing two things together when they're two separate issues.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can cut back on some of those 87,000 that were maybe hired to, interrogate us innocent people and add more to the actual processing of the work. Anyhow, there is, at the same hearing, there was also some very interesting comments made by Biden's small business administrator. Her name's Isabel Guzman. Let's take a listen to what she had to say, and then we'll come back to you, Dan.
Do you think $320 billion in new regulatory costs on American small businesses is good or bad?
Look, much of the regulation, especially the over 60 regulations that we're putting forward, are about simplification. So just because regulations are being put out there, that doesn't mean that it isn't about cutting red tape and simplifying our current system.
Yeah, with all due respect, I disagree with your assessment on the $320 billion is good for small businesses, because it's not.
Do American small business owners really need to be paying $320 billion in new regulatory costs? How do you see this playing out, Dan?
Well, let me think about that. No, they don't. Listen, anytime you're talking about more costs for regulation, it is rarely a good thing for small businesses, because most small businesses can't keep up with what the regulatory requirements are. That's why you see so many large corporations getting larger and so many smaller businesses struggling. They simply don't have the resources. So when we're talking about small businesses, we really need a less regulation. Of course, we need safety regulations, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about red tape that does nothing but slow the system down so the little guy has no way to get ahead.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. We need to slow it down and let the people catch back up. We've been, so shut down and suppressed for so long with all this COVID nonsense. It's really far past time they let us get ahead for once. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you for more?
Oh, you could always find me at Dan Geltrude anytime.
Thank you so much, Dan. Take care.